it's just going to be the same game again, isn't it?
That's the mindset I've been having since Shadow of the Tomb Raider was announced, the supposed grand finale of the now called Origins trilogy of the Tomb Raider series, once again developed by Crystal Dynamics. This was meant to be the moment where Lara Croft finally becomes the famed explorer we all know and love, to which I say,
bullshit, that's what you said about the last two games. Honestly, at this point, I don't think Crystal Dynamics has any clue what to do with the series and its heroine anymore, and nowhere is that more obvious than in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I was unfortunately right to say that it's basically the same game we've had twice before, but my god, were they desperately trying to convince us that this was going to be the most ambitious entry yet, cramming the game with all sorts of stuff to do just to needlessly slap on that $50 to $60 price tag, which funnily enough has already gone down in price a fair bit since launch.
I think this is also the point where people have had enough, because so far sales aren't doing so well on this game compared to the previous two. Either that or it came at a really bad time, because Marvel's Spider-Man was released for the PS4 a week earlier, and a lot of people were more looking forward to that game, myself included. I hope it's the former personally, because I believe we really need to show Crystal Dynamics that they can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect us to still buy it because it has Tomb Raider in the title. I'll save the ranting for now anyway, we need to go over the story first, or at least try to understand it, because Shadow of the Tomb Raider's plot can get pretty confusing sometimes, but I'll do my best to summarize. You know the drill, here's the time code and see you on the other side. Okay, 2 months after Rise of the Tomb Raider, Lara and Jonah have been investigating further into Trinity, the evil military organization from the last game, and while roaming the streets of Mexico, they discovered that this dude named Pedro Dominguez is their leader. Well, that was remarkably fast, and I would have thought Constantine would be the leader, but nope, it's this guy who hasn't been established at any point in the trilogy until now. Anyway, Lara follows Trinity's trails to not only find clues to a hidden city, but to also a dagger in a nearby temple that's said to cause an apocalypse, which Lara feels she can't let Trinity get a hold of because if they obtain that and the legendary silver box, then this means they could perform the cleansing, which is a permanent solar eclipse and basically creates Armageddon. Lara for some reason thinks it's a good idea to take the dagger out of its pedestal despite knowing of the consequences, and oh look at that, now a tsunami's occurred in Mexico and you get to witness a child fall to his death. Awesome job, Lara Croft. After some climbing, she finds Jonah, who's trying to help the injured from the tsunami, but as for Lara, despite this cataclysm being entirely her fault, she makes this whole situation all about her and how important it is that she's apparently the only one who can stop Trinity.
I have to go! I'm the only one!
You're the only one that can what? You don't know that you caused all this, Lara? Not everything is about you!
And this all doesn't even matter in the end, because Trinity corner Lara and take the dagger from her anyway, so all of that spilled blood was for nothing. But this doesn't stop Lara from following them to the hidden city of Paititi in Peru.
Since we were in Peru, I was really hoping that the T-Rex would perhaps make a return for another incredible boss fight, but sadly no, that would require the game to stop taking itself so seriously.
By the way, I forgot to mention that this plane sequence that Lara and Jonah used to get to Paititi is shown at the beginning of the game, but we're brought back to it right after Lara grabs the dagger, which isn't that far in, so I'm not sure why they even bothered making this scene a flashback. Was it to try and make the story more epic than it really is? If so, that's a pretty miserable attempt, but hey, we've got Lara being mauled by a leopard, and somehow surviving without a scratch on her despite the leopard being covered in blood. What? Oh, let's just move on. While exploring some of the Paititi tombs, Lara and Jonah find out that the dagger and the silver box belong to two goddesses, and using the dagger to pierce the box will kill the evil god Kukulkan and prevent the cleansing. And I'm not joking when I say this, but from this point in the story until near the end of the game, things just kinda happen. One of the tombs puts you up against these white humanoid creatures who are apparently the guardians of the silver box, ruled by one of the goddesses who looks like a demonic Queen Amidala. You meet with the Queen of Paititi and her son. Dominguez becomes the leader of a cult dedicated to Kukulkan and is revealed to be the Queen's brother-in-law, on top of being taken by Trinity as a child, where he eventually became leader. I don't know how that works. The Queen joins you briefly to wear these ridiculous cult disguises and kill some of the tribesmen, which is kinda neat, but it's very short-lived because she gets shot by one of Trinity's commanders named Rourke, which means her son is now crowned king. Lara goes on a complete rampage after Rourke tells her over the radio that he's killed Jonah, and she doesn't think at any point that he may be lying to her, but it's not until after she's killed God knows how many Trinity soldiers and burnt everything around her where she sees that Jonah is still alive. Admittedly, I do get a sense of enjoyment watching Lara go on a furious killing spree despite it being totally out of her character, but realizing what she's done puts her to tears, though Jonah manages to cheer her up by helping her figure out the location of the silver box, a secret passageway underneath one of Paititi's churches that leads to the tomb of a former Trinity recruit who holds the box. But surprise, surprise, Dominguez locates them, takes Jonah hostage, and Lara once again chooses to leave the artifact with Trinity for Jonah's life, dooming thousands, if not not millions of lives as opposed to just one. And to add to the ensemble of weak plot twists, it was Dominguez who killed Richard Croft because he didn't want him discovering Paititi and sharing its secrets. Of course he did. Monologue over, Jonah's ready to break free now and take the box, lucky for Lara, only to have the box stolen again by Dominguez later, and we have to run away from another apocalypse. Lara, Jonah, and the new king rally their troops and follow Trinity to their final location to see they're starting yet another apocalypse, a volcanic eruption. Making her way to Dominguez, Lara comes across Queen Amidala again and realize they have to team up and pose Lara as the other goddess so that she's one with her minions. As the last of Trinity's soldiers gets slaughtered, she makes it to Dominguez as he's filling himself with Kukulkan's power, and for this part I'm really not sure what's going on, but from what I can try and understand, after defeating Dominguez, the soul of Kukulkan is transferred into Lara, and while she could use her newfound power to resurrect her parents, she instead uses it to return the world to normal, now with 90% fewer disasters. So yeah, Lara decides to stay in Paititi for a little while longer, Jonah goes on vacation with one of the women he's been goggling with, and the post-credit scene just shows Lara in her mansion wondering what adventures may lie ahead. Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Yep, that's it. What do I think of it? It's just as cliche and problematic as the last two games, not any better and not any worse, though I will definitely say I had a harder time following this one without looking it up, but even after looking it up, the story didn't make sense at times, no doubt locking the details behind hidden collectibles similar to what they did with Rise. I can excuse this in something like Metroid Prime because scanning told you about the planet's lore, which wasn't necessary, but for an Uncharted Indiana Jones style game such as this, it isn't a good idea to lock away key plot points because it not only confuses those who just want to breeze through the story, it's also an annoying chore to collect various journals and documents which may or may not have any important information to begin with. It doesn't matter in the long run because this plot is just plain boring. There's nothing special about it other than the relationship between Lara and Jonah. That's the only time I was invested in the whole story, whether they're arguing with each other or Lara's having a mental breakdown and Jonah's trying to lift her spirits, but other than that, it's every tired disaster survival tribal war scenario in any form of media. Paititi's not a particularly interesting location either, especially for the last game in the trilogy, and I had to see way too many male butts than I would have allowed.
As in none at all.
It's a real bummer because at the start of the game when Lara unintentionally causes total annihilation, I was actually rather intrigued with what was going to happen. Maybe we'd get to understand how she feels about it, see what she does to fix the damage she's created, perhaps do some deep reflecting on whether or not it was actually her fault. I thought, okay, I'll bite, where are you going with this? And the answer is absolutely freaking nowhere. Lara just brushes it all off like it never happened. In fact, she's kinda ignorant throughout the whole game. It makes her look really selfish. And Trinity? I honestly don't know why they're even here. They're completely underutilized, and when the story does call for them, the way they're handled is so lame. Things just end with Trinity after Dominguez is defeated and Lara goes back to her mansion for a spot of tea. Nothing feels complete here. It's a rush plot for a rush game, and boy do I mean rush, because holy crap, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is one of the most average games I've ever played. You know what, I'll start with the positive stuff first, even if there aren't that many. Shooting still feels okay. The skill tree system has this ugly design to it, but it acts the same way as before, and nearly all the skills from the previous two games make a return, but unfortunately there aren't any new ones worth mentioning apart from using consumables to slow down time briefly while aiming, which could be handy. I really liked this one as well that lets you hang an enemy up on a tree and see his buddy panic in fear. That was actually pretty hilarious, but you only get to do that maybe once or twice in the whole game. Shooting fear arrows into enemies to make them fire at their own teammates help prevent congestion, though like hanging enemies you're barely given any opportunities to do so. I quite liked the healing mechanic that uses specific materials to save waiting for your health to regenerate, and to give the game some credit, even though you don't carry over skills from Rise, you at least start with all of your weapons and gear, except for the shotgun. However, it's not like you'll use it much anyway, because geez, this is one of the weakest shotguns I've ever used. Just look at how many shots I have to unleash to kill one dude. How is a machine gun doing more damage than a shotgun at point blank range? What tomfoolery is this? Shadow of the Tomb Raider works in a set pattern. You go to a new town, you speak with the locals, they point you to the nearby tomb because no one else apparently thinks to check there, and afterwards you engage in a firefight with either Trinity, different creatures, or the sacrificial tribesmen. I'm glad to finally see that there are more tombs put in for story progression on top of the secret challenge tombs you can locate, though this doesn't come without its faults. These aren't the most brain-teasing tombs out there, because once again the puzzle variety in all of them mostly amounts to attaching a rope to another object so that you can manipulate it to your advantage. For the third game in a trilogy, that's pathetic. It insists that I pay $30 for a season pass with more tombs to explore and added challenges to existing ones, but it can piss right off. I ain't paying more for an already expensive game that left me totally underwhelmed, especially $30 freaking worth of extra content. I doubt the game would let me access it straight away either, because this game absolutely relishes in restricting exploration. Hell, even the very first challenge tomb is blocked until you acquire the pickaxe. Did they not see the problem here? If discovery is supposed to be an important element to these games and you're just gonna put a giant brick wall right in the middle of it anyway, what's the freaking point? It just wastes your goddamn time, and yeah, there were some secret tombs I could conquer as I went through the game normally, but this weak motivation to try and get you to go back to previous areas isn't fulfilling, it's borderline irritating. You could do some available side quests in the meantime if you wanted to, just like in Rise of the Tomb Raider, but good god, these are some of the laziest I've ever seen in a video game. Rarely does a side quest provide anything remotely interesting for you to do, you're mostly just listening to the townspeople prattle on and on about their life stories and their petty problems, like finding a child's missing dice. Woo. It takes a while to even get the side quest started, and when you finally do, you just need to locate the next person to talk to and then keep going until you return to the side quest giver. There is so much freaking meandering in this game. Just going through the story takes maybe 12 to 15 hours depending on how many collectibles you pick up, and no way in hell am I doing 100% anytime soon. Even fast traveling takes too damn long, the load times are absurd. But let's not forget the bugs and inconsistent jump detection. For the bugs, I had this dude speak without moving his mouth, which reminded me of the PS1 days, and there was a jump near the end that I could clearly make, but Lara kept getting pulled back by some invisible magnet. Speaking of weird jumping, there were a number of times where I swear I put the left stick in the right direction, but Lara decided to go somewhere else and fall to her death. Or I come across a ledge that appears grabbable, but turns out to be just part of the scenery. Yeah, that's fun. Shadow of the Tomb Raider does have individual difficulty settings for exploration, puzzles, and combat, which sounds cool in theory for the former two, but all it does is remove the white paint to make it a little less obvious where you need to go, and survival instincts are turned off entirely, which is kind of a core feature in the Tomb Raider Origins trilogy, so I don't know why I'd want to do that.
Truthfully though, that's probably the only interesting thing about Shadow of the Tomb Raider, because otherwise, this is just a sloppy sequel on a number of levels.
Aside from just making the same game yet again, the big problem with Shadow and Rise of the Tomb Raider is that the mechanics weren't built for an action-adventure game. They only worked in the 2013 Tomb Raider because it was about improving Lara's survival skills and escaping the dangers of Yamatai. But in the sequels, Lara's made her own adventures, so focusing more on survival and combat doesn't make any sense. And nowhere is that more obvious than in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. It was a tough decision deciding which was worse between this or Rise of the Tomb Raider. Shadow was clearly rushed, hardly introduced anything new to the table, and has a pretty weak story, but Rise on the other hand was so bland and so forgettable in plot and gameplay that I can barely remember anything that happened. In the end though, I came to the conclusion that Shadow of the Tomb Raider is the worst game in the trilogy with just how lazily constructed it is and how much money they expect you to pay for the full package. For both of the games, I was on autopilot throughout most of it, absorbing next to nothing while playing. They borrow many tropes from action games of the last decade, mostly Uncharted, and doesn't add anything unique. There's even a moment where you take control of a young Lara that has no purpose aside from telling us things we already know about her past. I guess it's cool that PS4 Pro players can choose between 4K resolution or 1080p 60 frames per second, but judging from these comparison pictures, I do not see a difference, and frankly, I don't think this game looks as good as Rise of the Tomb Raider anyway. Everything just appears more cheap and thrown together, like Lara doing this weird lip movement sometimes, and they couldn't even be bothered to animate a splash effect during this death animation. Voice acting's passable, I suppose, but Camilla Luddington yet again sounds like she'd much rather be somewhere else. You're playing one of the most recognizable characters in gaming history. Why are you so bored?
Some people are afraid to believe in what they can't understand.
As the third game in the trilogy, Shadow of the Tomb Raider doesn't feel conclusive and nothing feels tightly wrapped. For God's sake, the Tomb Raider movie had a better ending than this. For speculation purposes, I went back to the 2013 Tomb Raider to see how it held up, and while it's not as impressive nowadays as it was back then, I still think it's the best game in the Origins trilogy because you could tell that there was a lot of thought put into it. It was something we had never seen before in a Tomb Raider game, and that was what made it so special. But lightning doesn't strike twice or thrice. By now, Crystal Dynamics should have had something that really works, and you know what, I'm starting to sound like a broken record at this point, so bottom line, if you do want to play Shadow of the Tomb Raider, wait for a price drop. It's most definitely not worth paying $50 to $60 for more of the same game we've already had twice before.
I was really hoping that Shadow of the Tomb Raider would give us that same spark that we had in the 2013 game, but it looks like that's never going to happen again. These games may have the Tomb Raider name, but I really don't think they deserve it. They're nothing of the sort, and with each new entry, it just strays further and further away from them. I don't even know why I'm so bitter about this, because I'm only what you would call a casual Tomb Raider fan. I'm not that tremendously into the games, but the way Crystal Dynamics is handling this trilogy just disappoints me to no end, and I very badly want this series to do well, I really do, but so far it's just shown no signs of improving. I think the problem here is Crystal Dynamics is focusing too much on what's popular right now with all of these open world sandbox games, rather than focusing on what makes a Tomb Raider game, like what they did with Tomb Raider Legend and Anniversary. Even Tomb Raider Underworld, for as much criticism as I gave it, still felt like a Tomb Raider game. They just need to look back and remember what worked before. And in the unlikely event that Crystal Dynamics happens to be watching this, if you do plan on making any more Tomb Raider games, just please take more time to think back about what people thought you did well at. You can borrow elements from the Origins trilogy, and you don't have to make them exactly like your previous trilogy. Just think long and hard about what you did right. Okay, I think I've ranted long enough, so we're going to cover one more game before we do the last of the Kingdom Hearts reviews with Dream Drop Distance, and we're going to look at a good example of an open world sandbox game with Insomniac's Spider-Man for the PS4. Really good game, and I'm very much looking forward to reviewing that. I've also now finally gotten myself a Patreon page if you'd like to have a look at it. I am currently hosting a poll for a game review that my generous donators can pick every month until they get the one that they've chosen. And maybe, just maybe, your vote will make the cut. I'll see you all next time.